The Christmas lights flickered above the long polished table, casting a glow that should have felt warm but instead only sharpened the tension in the room. Dad slammed his fist down so hard, the silverware rattled against the plates. His voice exploded, shaking the walls of that house where I had grown up. "You are dead to me." The words sliced through me sharper than the cold December wind outside. Linda, my stepmom, leaned back with her wineglass, lips twisting into a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. Jessica, my perfect sister, whipped her head toward me, her eyes glittering with triumph as she spat out her own poison. "Without us, you will starve." I sat frozen in my chair, the knot in my stomach turning to stone. In that moment, I knew they meant it. I was no longer part of this family. I remember every sound from that night. The scrape of Dad's chair on the hardwood floor as he pushed back, the faint jingle of the ornaments outside on the porch as the wind shook them. The laughter from the neighbors carried faintly through the window as if mocking me with their joy. My body felt like it was shrinking, as if I were being pressed down into the wood of the chair, while their words kept raining down. It was supposed to be Christmas dinner, the night for family, but I was watching my own family dissolve me out of their story. Dad's eyes burned into mine, the veins in his forehead bulging. He was always a man of appearances, but that night, he let the mask fall. He wanted the whole world, every guest seated at that table, to know I was cut off. His voice echoed as he repeated that I was dead to him. The way he said it, final and merciless, left no doubt. He tore away any illusion that blood or love could protect me. Linda's laugh still rings in my ears. It was not a nervous laugh or one of surprise. It was deliberate, cruel, a punctuation to my father's words. She wanted me gone, and she wanted me to feel humiliated as it happened. Her eyes glinted with satisfaction, like she had won something she had been planning for years. She sipped her wine as if the scene was entertainment for her, and maybe it was. Jessica's words cut deepest of all. "Without us, you will starve." She hissed it with such venom that it felt rehearsed, as if she had been waiting her entire life for that chance to put me in my place. She was the golden daughter, the one who could do no wrong. She knew Dad would never turn his wrath on her. She wore her confidence like a crown, and I was the fool exiled from the kingdom. I wanted to speak, to shout back, to tell them they were wrong, but my throat was locked. I could feel the weight of every stare around that table. My hands trembled in my lap. The warmth from the candles felt suffocating rather than comforting. My chest tightened until I thought I might not be able to breathe. Finally, I pushed back my chair. The legs scraped across the floor, a sound that felt like a door slamming shut on everything I had ever known. I stood up, my knees weak, my vision blurred with unshed tears. No one told me to sit back down. No one asked me to stay. Not even Mom's photo on the mantel seemed to anchor me. I walked out of that dining room while Dad's voice still thundered behind me. He told the guests to eat, to enjoy themselves, as if throwing away his daughter was just another course in the meal. Linda whispered something I could not catch, followed by another peal of laughter. Jessica's smirk followed me out the door. The cold hit me like a wall as soon as I stepped onto the porch. The snow had started falling harder, covering the walkway in a fresh layer of white. I had no coat, only a thin sweater, because I had thought I was coming to dinner, not an execution. My breath puffed into the night air, sharp and painful in my lungs. I stood there for a moment, frozen, staring at the lights strung along the railing. They looked so cheerful, so bright, so false. I wanted to scream. I wanted to bang on the door and demand they let me back in. Demand they see me. Demand they stop treating me as if I was invisible. But instead, I turned and walked down those steps, each one crunching under my shoes. I did not know where I was going. I just knew I could not stay. The street was quiet, except for the faint sound of carolers 2 blocks away. I followed the sidewalk, my arms wrapped around myself for warmth. Every word they had thrown at me echoed in my head. "You are dead to me. Without us, you will starve." The night swallowed me whole as I kept walking, leaving behind the house that no longer held a place for me. I wandered until my legs felt like they would give out. The bus stop on Maplewood Drive offered a hard wooden bench under a weak streetlight. I sat down, hugging my knees, trying to will myself not to cry. My breath fogged the glass of the shelter. Cars drove by, some full of families on their way to celebrations. I wondered if any of them could imagine that a girl sat here, disowned and discarded on Christmas night. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Mark Benson, an old friend from high school. His name lit up the screen like a small mercy. I answered with shaky hands. He told me he had heard from someone that my family had made a scene, and he asked if I was all right. His voice was warm, familiar, pulling me back from the edge. He offered to come get me, to let me crash at his place. I almost said yes. The thought of walking into a house where someone actually wanted me felt like heaven, but I told him no. I needed to remember this night exactly as it was. I needed to carry the full weight of it so that I would never forget. I told him I was fine, that I had somewhere to go. I lied and he knew it, but he respected my answer. He said, "If you change your mind, call me no matter what time." Then he hung up. I sat in that bus shelter until the cold numbed me to the bone. Tears finally came slow and hot, cutting down my cheeks. I wiped them away with the sleeve of my sweater, angry that they even existed. I whispered to myself, "They think I will starve. They think I will disappear. They will see." The first bus of the night hissed to a stop in front of me. I climbed on with nothing but a small purse and a heart full of anger. I rode into the city, the windows fogged, the streets glowing with Christmas lights that felt like lies. I did not know what tomorrow would look like. I only knew I was no longer Emily Carter of Applewood Court. I was no longer anyone's daughter. I was no one. And yet, somewhere in that emptiness, I felt the first flicker of freedom. The days after that night blurred together. I found a cheap room to rent in a crumbling building off Belmont Avenue in Chicago. The radiator clanked but barely gave off heat. I shared the bathroom with 3 strangers, the walls so thin I could hear every cough and every argument. Still, it was mine. It was proof I could survive outside of their house. I picked up shifts at a diner on North Clark Street. The manager gave me the late-night hours no one wanted. I wore a polyester uniform that smelled of grease and bleach, my feet aching from standing 12 hours at a stretch. Customers snapped their fingers, barked their orders, sometimes forgot to tip. Every insult or careless laugh threw me back to that Christmas dinner, to Linda's smirk, Jessica's sharp voice, Dad's booming condemnation. But I swallowed it all, cleaned the tables, and kept going. At night, when I dragged myself back to that little room I studied, I had enrolled in community college with what little money I had saved. The textbooks were heavy, the assignments endless, but they gave me purpose. Each chapter I read, each essay I wrote, was another step away from their shadow. Winter stretched on. The wind off Lake Michigan bit through my coat. I sometimes skipped meals to make rent-eating ramen noodles night after night. I told myself it was fuel, not punishment. Every slurp was defiance. Every empty pocket was proof I was still standing. Jessica's words haunted me in those nights when my stomach growled. "Without us, you will starve." I whispered back into the darkness, "I'm starving but not dying. I am becoming." I worked harder than I thought possible. At the diner, I picked up double shifts. At school, I pushed through exhaustion to hand in assignments. On the bus rides, I scribbled notes on flashcards. My hands were always tired, my feet always sore, but my spirit burned. Sometimes I passed by Elmwood Grove on my way to classes. The neighborhood looked the same. The Carter house still glittered with perfect landscaping wreaths on the door, cars in the driveway. I never saw them, but I knew they were inside, warm and fed, pretending I did not exist. I stood across the street once, hidden behind a tree, watching the lights flicker in the windows. My chest tightened, my throat ached. I whispered to myself, one day they will remember me. The semester dragged on. My grades came back strong enough to make me eligible for scholarships. I filled out every form I could find, poured my story into essays. I did not know if anyone would care, but I wrote the truth. Disowned at Christmas. Cut off without a dime. Working nights to survive, trying to build something out of nothing. When the acceptance letter arrived in the mail, I held it like it was a fragile miracle. A scholarship, full tuition. I sat on the floor of that cold room, the radiator clanking above me, and cried. Not tears of despair this time, but of triumph. I thought of Dad's face that night, the finality in his voice. I thought of Linda's laughter, Jessica's sneer. "Without us, you will starve." I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, "I am not starving. I am rising." The morning after that Christmas dinner felt like waking up in a different world. The cold light came through the blinds of the small room I had rented, and for a few seconds I forgot where I was. Then it came back, the sound of Dad's fist on the table. Linda's laugh, Jessica's sharp words. My chest ached as if the echoes had followed me into sleep and would not let me rest. I pulled the thin blanket tighter around me, wishing it could shut out the memory. But nothing could. I had only a duffel bag of clothes and a few dollars left from my last paycheck at the diner. My account was empty because Dad had cut off every line connected to the family. The credit card stopped working. The health insurance card meant nothing. And I had no backup. I stood in the middle of that room staring at my things, feeling like a stray animal trying to decide whether to fight or hide. The landlord had not even looked me in the eye when he handed me the keys. He just took the cash and pointed toward the stairs. The building smelled of mold and cigarettes, the kind of place where people lived because they had no other choice. My neighbor down the hall had music playing too loud at all hours, a bass that rattled the pipes. At night, I could hear people yelling outside, arguments drifting in from the alley. I told myself it was temporary, but deep down I knew I had no plan. That morning, I dressed in jeans that had faded at the knees and a sweatshirt with a frayed collar. I walked out into the freezing air, my breath clouding in front of me. The sidewalks were slick with ice, and I kept my hands deep in my pockets to keep them from going numb. I passed by a bakery where the smell of fresh bread nearly stopped me in my tracks. My stomach twisted with hunger, but I kept walking. The diner on North Clark was where I went next. I had been working shifts before the disowning, but now it was all I had. The manager, a heavy-set man named Carl, was not unkind, but he treated everyone like we were replaceable. When I walked in that day, he raised his eyebrows and said he thought maybe I had gone home for the holidays. I told him home was gone. He grunted, handed me an apron, and said he could give me extra hours since no one else wanted to work the week after Christmas. Those hours became my lifeline. I worked through mornings, afternoons, nights. I poured coffee into chipped mugs for truckers who came in at dawn. I carried plates of pancakes and greasy bacon to families who complained about the cold. Sometimes I caught myself staring too long at mothers with their kids, the simple way they wiped syrup from their children's mouths. It hurt like a bruise that never healed. There was one night when a customer snapped his fingers at me, demanding more ketchup. The sound cracked in the air, just like Dad's hand had cracked against the table. For a second, I could not move. I stood there, the bottle already in my hand, frozen with the memory pressing against me. The man cleared his throat and barked again, and I forced my body to move. As I set the bottle down, my hand shook. He never noticed. He kept eating, never knowing that he had triggered the deepest wound in me. I told myself I had to keep pushing forward. I had enrolled in community college using what little financial aid I could piece together. The campus was small, a collection of brick buildings near the lake. The first time I stepped into the library, I felt a strange kind of safety, as if books could shield me from everything I had lost. I chose business classes because I thought maybe one day I could run something of my own. I did not tell anyone my story. I just blended in the girl with tired eyes and secondhand clothes. The nights were the worst. After the last shift at the diner, I would ride the bus back to Belmont Avenue. The streets would be almost empty, the shops closed, the lights of the city glowing like promises I could not yet reach. I pressed my forehead against the window and watched the city slide past, feeling both invisible and painfully exposed. My hands ached from carrying trays, my back throbbed, but I carried my textbooks in my lap, highlighting paragraphs under the dim bus light. Mark Benson called again a week later. He asked how I was holding up. His voice was gentle, but I kept my answers short. I told him I was fine, even though my feet were blistered and my body screamed for rest. He offered again to let me stay at his place. He said no one should be alone, especially after what happened. I thanked him, but I refused. Something inside me insisted I had to do this on my own. If I accepted help, it would feel like admitting Jessica was right, that I could not survive without them. The hunger stayed with me. Sometimes I counted the coins in my pocket, weighing whether to buy a sandwich or save it for the bus. More than once, I chose the bus. I ate saltines from the diner when no one was looking, washing them down with lukewarm coffee. Each time I remembered Jessica's sneer, "Without us, you will starve." I whispered back in my mind, maybe I am starving, but I am not broken. Classes were harder than I expected. I had to fight to stay awake, fight to focus, fight to keep from drowning under the weight of it all. But there was one professor who noticed me. She asked why I always sat in the back, why I looked so exhausted. I brushed her off, not ready to share. She handed me back an essay with a small note written in the margin. "You are stronger than you know." I stared at those words long after the class ended, my hands trembling. One afternoon, I came home to find an eviction notice taped to my door. My rent was late, and the landlord did not care that I was barely scraping by. My stomach dropped, and for a moment the walls closed in around me. I sat on the floor, the paper crumpled in my hands. For an hour, I could not move. Then I picked myself up and called Anna, a girl from my business class who had offered her couch once before. She said yes without hesitation. Her apartment was tiny, but it felt like sanctuary. She made me tea and told me not to worry about rent for a while. She said she knew what it was like to struggle, that her parents had also cut her off when she chose a different path than they wanted. For the first time since that Christmas night, I felt a spark of connection. Maybe family could be chosen. Living with Anna showed me that friendship could be just as binding as blood. We studied together, laughed at the ridiculousness of our professors, and sometimes sat in silence when the world felt too heavy. I learned to trust her in small ways, and those small ways grew. But the pain never fully left. I would see Jessica's face on magazine covers at the checkout line in the grocery store. smiling flawless, praised for her beauty. I would hear Linda's name mentioned in charity circles, admired for her contributions. And Dad, always the respected man of finance, shaking hands at banquets, photographed in tuxedos. To the world, they were untouchable. To me, they were the people who had left me in the cold. That duality ate at me. On the nights when I could not sleep, I stared at the ceiling of Anna's apartment and felt rage bubbling under my ribs. They had everything and I had nothing but my will. I clenched my fists and whispered to the dark, I will not just survive. I will build something they cannot ignore. The turning point came one spring morning. I received a letter from the scholarship committee. My essay, the one where I had poured out the truth of being abandoned by my family, had won me a full ride. I unfolded that letter with shaking hands, reading it over and over until the words blurred. My breath came fast, tears sliding down my face. For the first time in months, they were tears of triumph, not despair. I thought of Dad's voice declaring me dead to him. I thought of Linda's cold laugh, Jessica's poisonous words. Without us, you will starve. I pressed the letter against my chest, closed my eyes, and whispered to myself, I am alive, I am learning, and one day I will thrive. The bus rocked gently as it made its way down Lakeshore Drive, and I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, staring at the water where the waves slapped against the shore. My textbooks lay heavy in my lap, their corners frayed from constant use. My body ached from another late-night shift at the diner, but I refused to let exhaustion win. I whispered to myself that this was the price of freedom, and I would pay it every single day if I had to. The scholarship letter still sat folded in my bag, a talisman that reminded me that all the long nights, the hunger, the loneliness were not for nothing. I had been told I would starve without them, but here I was, riding a bus toward a future that belonged to me. The salt stains on my coat sleeve from the winter, the blistered hands from carrying trays, they all became proof that I could endure. When I walked across the campus of Lakeshore State University for the first time, the air smelled like new beginnings. The buildings loomed taller than the community college I had left behind. Students hurried past with backpacks, chatting easily, laughing, moving as if they belonged. I felt like an intruder with my thrift store bag and secondhand boots, but I held my head up anyway. Each step across that quad was a step away from the girl who had been thrown out on Christmas. The first classes were overwhelming. Professors spoke quickly and the assignments seemed impossible. I sat in the back row taking notes, furiously afraid to miss a single word. My hands cramped from writing, and sometimes I had to shake them out before continuing. The other students carried sleek laptops and wore brand-name clothes. While I scribbled into a battered notebook, I told myself it did not matter. What mattered was that I was there. At night, after long hours at the diner, I would sit at a small desk in the corner of the apartment I shared with Anna. The glow from the lamp lit up the dark circles under my eyes, and the hum of the fridge was the only sound keeping me company while Anna slept. I read until the words blurred, highlighting passages, repeating definitions under my breath, determined to carve the knowledge into my brain. There were times when I thought I could not keep going. The weight of everything pressed down so hard it felt like the air itself was against me. Once, while cleaning a stack of plates in the diner, I overheard two waitresses talking about their parents paying their tuition, their cars, their spring break trips. I clenched my jaw until it hurt, scrubbing harder. Thinking about Linda's mocking smile and Jessica's polished life splashed across magazines. I could not compete with their privilege, but I could outlast it. Anna became my anchor. She had a sharp wit that kept me laughing even when my eyes were red from lack of sleep. She made instant noodles taste like feasts by telling stories of her childhood, of the grandmother who taught her to sew. Sometimes we sat together on the couch, both bent over our books, occasionally glancing up to exchange a tired smile. I began to realize that chosen family could be more powerful than blood. Mark drifted in and out of my life too. He checked in with a call or text, always asking if I was eating enough, if I needed help with anything. I kept him at arm's length, too proud to accept more than friendship. I needed him to see me as strong, not as the broken girl from high school who had been abandoned. Still, his voice carried a comfort that soothed me in ways I did not want to admit. As the semester dragged on, I poured myself into a major in business administration. It felt practical, but also like a path that could one day give me control over my own destiny. My professors began to notice me. One of them, Professor Grace Collins, pulled me aside after class one day. She had a presence that filled the room, her silver hair tied back neatly, her eyes sharp with intelligence. She asked me why I always seemed so serious. I shrugged, not ready to tell her everything. She studied me for a long moment before saying, "There is fire in you. Do not let anyone put it out." Those words stuck with me, echoing in my head long after she walked away. I began to write more essays that revealed slivers of my truth. I wrote about resilience, about survival, about the difference between having everything handed to you and having to fight for every scrap. Professors wrote comments praising my perspective, my grit. For the first time, I began to believe that my pain could be turned into something valuable. But the shadows never disappeared completely. One evening, while waiting in line at the grocery store, I saw Jessica's face staring back at me from a glossy magazine cover. She was draped in designer clothes, her hair styled to perfection, her smile flawless. The headline praised her as the new face of American elegance. My throat tightened. The cashier noticed me staring and said, "She's gorgeous, isn't she?" I forced a smile and nodded, but inside anger coiled like a snake. They still had everything, and I was still fighting for scraps. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Jessica's face burned into my eyelids. The rage fueled me. I whispered to the dark, "You will see me. One day you will not be able to ignore me." The chance to prove myself came sooner than I expected. The university announced a competition for student entrepreneurs. The prize was small, but significant enough funding to start a small venture. I hesitated before signing up, terrified of failing, but Anna pushed me. She reminded me of all the nights I had talked about wanting to build something that mattered. We stayed up late brainstorming ideas, spreading papers across the floor. My mind raced with possibilities. I thought about all the talented students I knew who struggled to sell their handmade crafts, their art, their jewelry. An idea took root. A platform where students could sell their work, connect with buyers, and earn something of their own. The weeks leading up to the competition were brutal. I balanced classes shifts at the diner and endless hours refining my business plan. I practiced my pitch in front of the bathroom mirror until my voice grew hoarse. Anna listened patiently, nodding, asking questions, pushing me to be sharper. Grace offered feedback too, reminding me to speak with conviction, not apology. The day of the competition, my stomach churned with nerves. The auditorium was filled with students, professors, and local business leaders. David Miller, a smug MBA student from a wealthy family, strutted around like he owned the place. He gave me a condescending smile as if my presence was amusing to him. I clenched my fists and reminded myself that I had faced worse than his arrogance. When it was my turn to present, I walked to the front, my legs trembling. I set my papers down, looked out at the audience, and took a deep breath. Then I spoke. I told them about my idea about the need for students to have a platform, about how creativity deserved to be nurtured. My voice steadied as I went on, passion overtaking fear. I saw heads nodding, pens scribbling notes. For the first time, I felt like I was being heard. When the judges announced the winners, I held my breath. My name was called. The applause rose around me, and for a moment I stood frozen, hardly believing it. Then Anna squeezed my hand, her eyes shining, and I walked to the stage to accept the award. My chest swelled with a pride I had never known. Later that night, as I sat in the quiet of our apartment, I held the certificate in my lap. I thought of Dad's voice, cold and final. "You are dead to me." I thought of Jessica's cruel words. "Without us, you will starve." And then I looked around me at the papers scattered with ideas, at the glow of the city outside the window, at the dreams just beginning to take shape. I whispered to myself, I am alive. I am creating, and this is only the beginning. When I pulled the heavy glass door open to the business school building, that fall, the smell of fresh paint and coffee hit me all at once. It was my first semester at Lakeshore State University after transferring from community college, and my heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. The lobby was filled with polished floors, bright lights, and students who looked like they had been born into money. Their clothes were clean and stylish, their shoes brand new, their laptops sleek and fast. I walked through with my thrift store bag slung over my shoulder and boots that had seen better winters, determined not to let my insecurities show. Every step across that lobby reminded me of the night I walked away from the Carter house, shivering in the snow with nothing but anger to warm me. If I could survive that, I could survive this. I repeated the thought silently as I found my classroom and slid into a seat at the edge of the room. The professor, a woman with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, introduced herself as Grace Collins. Her voice carried through the room without effort, drawing everyone's attention. She spoke about resilience, about leadership being born out of struggle. Every word seemed directed at me. When her eyes swept across the rows of students and landed on me, I felt exposed, as if she could see straight through the tired smile I wore. After class, while other students gathered in groups or scrolled through their phones, Grace stopped me at the door. She asked why I always looked so serious, her tone neither mocking nor concerned but curious. I shrugged and said I had a lot on my plate. She studied me for a moment, then said softly that fire can be a gift if you learn how to use it. Then she walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway with those words echoing in my ears. That semester tested me harder than anything before. I balanced a full course load, late-night diner shifts, and the fragile beginnings of my business idea. Anna was by my side through it all. We shared an apartment that barely fit 2 people, with a couch that sagged in the middle and a stove that clicked but rarely lit on the first try. She taped motivational quotes to the wall above our desks, and sometimes we read them aloud when we were too tired to keep going. We spent weekends bent over notebooks, laptops, and coffee cups, shaping the business plan that had started as a late-night idea into something real. Craft Nest, that was the name we chose. It felt right, like a place where creativity could be safe and valued. Our classmates laughed at the name, but I did not care. I had learned long ago not to depend on approval. The night before the campus startup competition, I could barely sleep. My mind replayed every failure, every doubt, every memory of Dad's voice telling me I was nothing. I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, the sound of Anna's breathing steady beside me. I whispered into the darkness that I would not let fear take this from me. The competition took place in the student auditorium, a space that smelled faintly of dust and ambition. Students bustled about, clutching their slides and notes, adjusting ties, smoothing skirts. David Miller was there too, standing in the corner with his polished smile and designer suit. His confidence radiated from him like a neon sign, and his friends surrounded him, laughing at jokes I could not hear. He caught my eye and smirked, as if to say I had no business standing in the same room as him. When my name was called, my legs felt like they were made of stone. I walked onto the stage with my papers clutched so tightly the edges cut into my palms. The lights were hot against my face, the audience a blur of shadows. My voice trembled at first, but then I remembered Grace's words about fire. I straightened my shoulders, looked out at the crowd, and spoke with every ounce of conviction I could gather. I told them about students with talent who lacked opportunity, about artists who worked late-night jobs, but had nowhere to show their work. I spoke about creating a platform that gave them not only a marketplace, but a sense of community. The more I talked, the steadier my voice became, and by the time I finished, I no longer felt like the girl who had been cast aside. I felt like someone with purpose. The applause filled the room, and for a moment I just stood there, soaking it in. My eyes searched the crowd and landed on Anna. She was on her feet, clapping harder than anyone else, her smile wide and proud. Grace sat in the second row, nodding slightly, her eyes warm with approval. When they announced Craft Nest as one of the winners, my knees nearly buckled. I walked to the stage to accept the certificate and the small check that felt like a fortune to me. In that moment, I did not hear Dad's voice or Linda's laugh. I only heard the sound of my own heart, steady and strong. Later that evening, Anna and I celebrated with pizza and cheap soda. We spread our notes across the table and planned our next steps, our laughter bouncing off the thin walls. For a few hours, the weight of my past lifted, and all I felt was hope. But the world has a way of reminding you of old wounds. A week later, as I stood in line at the campus coffee shop, my eyes caught a magazine displayed by the register. Jessica's face stared back at me, flawless and shining. The headline praised her as the rising star of fashion, the face of Lumen Atelier. I froze the coffee cup, shaking in my hand. People around me chatted about exams and parties, oblivious to the storm inside me. I bought the magazine, though it meant giving up lunch money, and carried it back to the apartment. I spread it open on the table, staring at Jessica's smile. She looked untouchable, adored, successful. I felt the old ache return, the sting of being erased. Anna found me there, my hands clenched on the glossy pages. She put her hand over mine and said quietly that it did not matter what Jessica had. What mattered was what I was building. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to let go of the bitterness, but I could not. I traced my fingers over Jessica's perfect image and whispered to myself that one day they would not be able to deny me. The semester ended with long nights of exams and final projects. My body stretched to its limits. When the grades came back, I stared at the screen in disbelief. Straight A's. Every class, every test, every paper, I had done it. I had not only survived, I had thrived. I wanted to scream it from the rooftops, to throw it in their faces, to prove them wrong. But instead I folded the paper, tucked it away, and whispered that it was just the beginning. The summer brought new challenges. Craft Nest slowly began to take shape, though money was always scarce. I worked double shifts at the diner, then came home to sketch logos and code late into the night with Anna. Mark dropped by occasionally, offering to help with the technical side. His patience and quiet encouragement reminded me of what it felt like to be seen without judgment. Still, I kept a wall between us. Trust was not something I could give freely anymore. As the days grew hotter, the apartment stifling and noisy, I clung to the vision of what could be. Every bead of sweat, every sore muscle, every sleepless night became fuel. I remembered the snow on my face as I walked away from Applewood Court, the hollow laughter echoing in my ears, and I swore I would never be that powerless again. The fall semester loomed, and with it more opportunities. Grace called me into her office one afternoon, her bookshelves lined with awards and photographs from her career. She told me she saw something in me that she rarely found in students. Determination carved from pain. She said it could break me or make me, and that it was up to me to decide. I walked out of her office with my chest tight, my hands clenched. I had already made my decision long ago. Pain would not break me. It would build me. That night, as I stood on the small balcony of our apartment, the city lights blinking in the distance, I thought again of Dad's words. "You are dead to me." They had cut me out of their lives as if I was nothing. But as the wind tugged at my hair and the noise of the city rose around me, I realized I was building a new life, one that no one could take away. The smell of pizza and the sound of laughter filled the cramped apartment as Anna and I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by piles of notes, receipts, and half-written plans. The certificate from the startup competition lay on the table between us, its edges curling slightly, a reminder that something I had once only dared to dream was now beginning to take root. Craft Nest was more than an idea now. It was a fragile seed, and I knew that if I nurtured it with every ounce of energy I had, it could grow into the kind of life I had promised myself on that freezing Christmas night when my family told me I was dead to them. The weeks that followed were a blur of long hours and small victories. Anna and I scraped together what little money we had to buy a second-hand laptop, its screen scratched but functional. We set it up on our rickety kitchen table, wires running across the floor, the glow of the screen lighting our tired faces late into the night. We argued about layouts, debated about logos, and tested functions until our eyes stung. Every bug we fixed, every hurdle we cleared, felt like another step away from the Carter name and the shadow of their rejection. I remember sitting in the diner one afternoon during a slow shift, my apron smeared with ketchup, when I sketched the first rough design of the Craft Nest homepage on the back of a receipt. A customer snapped his fingers at me, breaking my concentration, and I rushed to refill his coffee. But I folded that receipt carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Even in the middle of drudgery, I held on to the vision. Money was always the enemy. We balanced every penny, often choosing between groceries and software costs. There were nights when dinner was nothing but crackers and peanut butter, and mornings when we shared a single cup of coffee between the two of us. But hunger had been my companion for years. It no longer scared me. What scared me was the thought of failing, of proving Jessica's cruel words right. "Without us, you will starve." I repeated them in my head like a dare, a line I would never let her win. Mark reappeared in my life during this time. It was at a networking event in a crowded bar on North Clark Street. I had been dragged there by Anna, who insisted we needed to meet people who could support our project. The room buzzed with voices and the smell of beer, and I felt awkward and out of place until I heard a familiar laugh. Mark looked older, but still carried that easy smile that had once been my lifeline in the darkest nights. We talked by the bar, his eyes lighting up as I told him about Craft Nest. He asked questions about coding, about structure, about security, and I admitted I was barely keeping up with the technical side. He offered to help casually like it was nothing, but I knew what he was giving me was a gift. At first I hesitated. Accepting help felt dangerous, too close to dependence. But something in his steady gaze reassured me. This was not pity. It was partnership. With Mark's help, the site began to look real. He spent evenings in our apartment, wires and pizza boxes scattered everywhere, explaining code in terms I could understand. Sometimes his hand brushed mine as we leaned over the keyboard, and for a moment the air would thicken, but we never said anything. We stayed focused on the work because for me, this was more than a project. It was survival. The first time a student uploaded their handmade jewelry onto the site, I almost cried. Watching a simple photo appear on our platform felt like watching a door open. Soon more students followed, posting paintings, pottery, embroidered scarves. The site grew slowly but steadily, and each new listing filled me with a pride I had never known. I was building something that mattered, something that gave others what I had been denied opportunity. It was during one of those long nights, our kitchen table covered in scribbled notes, when Anna suddenly burst out laughing. She pointed to the wall where a sticky note I had written months ago still clung. "Someday they will knock on my door." She said it like a joke, but my chest tightened. For me, it was not a joke. It was a promise. The universe has a way of testing promises. One afternoon, as I walked across campus with my books pressed to my chest, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. My breath caught in my throat. It was a photo of Jessica dressed in an elegant gown, gracing the cover of a national fashion magazine. The message beneath it read simply, "Still think you can compete." The sender's number was unfamiliar, but I knew who it was, Linda. I stood frozen in the middle of the walkway as students hurried past me, their laughter and chatter muffled by the roar in my ears. My chest burned and I wanted to throw the phone into the nearest trash can. But instead I tucked it into my pocket, my hand trembling. For the rest of the day I could not focus. Jessica's perfect face haunted me, and Linda's mockery dug deep. That night I sat on the balcony of our apartment, the city lights shimmering below. I stared at the message again and again, fury boiling in my veins. They still thought I was nothing. They still thought that they could reach into my life and remind me of my place. But I had no place in their world anymore. I whispered to the night, I will not compete. I will surpass. Craft Nest continued to grow despite my moments of doubt. Local artists began to take notice, and a small community formed around our platform. Anna and I spent hours answering emails, fixing glitches, and cheering every sale like it was a miracle. Mark kept the site secure, his calm presence grounding me when I felt overwhelmed. Grace offered advice on scaling, reminding me to think long-term, to build with intention rather than haste. Then came the day a local paper ran a story about us. The headline read, "From Struggle to Startup. A self-made student builds opportunity for others." My name was in print for the first time, and when I held that newspaper in my hands, I felt something shift inside me. The world was beginning to see me not as the girl who had been abandoned, but as a woman who was creating something of her own. I carried that paper with me everywhere for a week, pulling it out of my bag just to run my fingers over the ink. Each time I looked at it, I remembered Dad's voice. "You are dead to me." And I thought, not anymore. The more Craft Nest grew, the more the lines between exhaustion and exhilaration blurred. There were nights I collapsed onto the couch with my shoes still on, too tired to move. There were mornings when Anna shook me awake, coffee in hand, saying we had to keep going. There were moments when I doubted everything, when I feared failure was inevitable. But then I remembered the cold, the hunger, the sting of rejection, and I knew that failure was not an option. One evening after a particularly long week, Mark and I sat on the floor of the apartment surrounded by wires and notebooks. He looked at me seriously and said, "You know, this is going to be big, right? Bigger than you think." I wanted to believe him, but fear held me back. Still, his certainty wrapped around me like a blanket. It was not all victories. The landlord threatened eviction when we fell behind on rent. Our electricity was nearly cut off 1 month because we had poured too much into server costs. But each crisis we solved made us stronger, more determined. Every challenge was another nail in the coffin of the Carter family's prophecy. On nights when the city grew quiet, I sometimes imagined them sitting in their grand house, Jessica shining in the spotlight, Linda sipping wine, Dad shaking hands at banquets. I wondered if they ever thought of me. I wondered if they ever doubted their decision. Then I reminded myself it did not matter. My revenge was not in their thoughts. It was in my life. As summer approached, Craft Nest reached its first 100 users. Anna and I celebrated with dollar store champagne, laughing until our sides hurt. For the first time in years, I felt joy without a shadow hanging over it. It was fragile, yes, but it was mine. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I whispered into the darkness, "This is just the beginning. One day they will knock on my door and I will be ready." The night we signed our very first investment papers, Anna and I celebrated with greasy pizza from the corner shop and a bottle of cheap wine. The apartment smelled of tomato sauce and printer ink, our tables still covered with contracts and pens, but none of that mattered. I stared at the check we had just deposited, a small seed round from a student investor group, and my heart pounded with something I had never truly felt before, security. Not complete security, not the kind that cushioned Jessica's life or paid for Linda's gowns, but enough to keep the lights on and the servers running. Enough to prove that Craft Nest was more than a dream. I leaned back against the couch, grease staining the edge of my sleeve, and thought about how far I had come from that night on the bus when I had nothing but anger to keep me warm. I told Anna that I still heard Dad's voice in the back of my head sometimes, telling me I was dead to him. She raised her glass and said that voice had no power anymore. I tried to believe her, and for the first time in a long time, I almost did. The weeks after that were filled with sleepless nights, but they felt different than before. Now every hour I spent coding, writing pitches, or talking with potential vendors came with a sense of momentum. The work no longer felt like survival, it felt like building. I saw myself differently too. I was not just a girl scraping together pennies and dodging eviction notices. I was becoming a founder, someone who created rather than begged. Grace watched closely from the sidelines, guiding me when my ambition ran faster than my resources. She sat across from me in her office, sipping black coffee, and told me not to let small victories distract me from the larger vision. "Build not just a company, build yourself," she said. Those words sank deeper than I admitted even to her. Then came the invitation to the citywide startup fair. Dozens of student companies would present their work to a panel of judges, investors, and reporters. Anna nearly jumped out of her chair when we received the email. I wanted to share her excitement, but my stomach tightened. The thought of standing on a stage again, of competing against students with wealthy families and polished connections, filled me with dread. The weeks leading up to the fair were brutal. We lived on instant noodles and adrenaline. Mark came over almost every night, sprawled across the floor with wires and laptops working quietly but intently. He believed in CraftNest more than I believed in myself, and sometimes when my energy flagged, he would catch my eye and remind me silently that I had already survived worse. The night before the fair, I could not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator clank, hearing Jessica's voice in my memory. "Without us, you will starve," I whispered into the darkness. "Watch me." The fair was held at Navy Pier, the glass windows overlooking the water as sunlight streamed in. Booths lined the hall, banners and glossy brochures everywhere. Students in pressed suits adjusted their ties, their families hovering nearby, offering encouragement. I had no family in the crowd, only Anna and Mark, but I told myself they were more than enough. That was when I saw him again. David Miller, polished as ever, surrounded by a small crowd of admirers. His booth gleamed with sleek displays, his logo professionally printed, his pitch deck projected on a giant screen. He spotted me across the room and smirked, tilting his head as if to say I did not belong. His words from months ago still lingered. Not everyone can escape their past. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to keep walking. When it was my turn to present, I stepped onto the stage, the microphone cold in my hand. My knees shook, but I steadied myself by gripping the edge of the podium. I began with the story of students struggling to sell their crafts, of artists drowning under bills while their talent went unseen. I spoke about CraftNest as a haven, a place where creativity could earn dignity. The words poured out of me, steadier with each sentence. I watched faces in this audience soften, heads nodding, pens scratching notes. When the judges announced the winners, my breath caught. CraftNest had not only placed, it had won. Applause rose, flashing lights from cameras hit my face, and for the first time I felt something close to vindication. David's jaw tightened in the corner, his polished smile cracking. My hands shook as I held the certificate, but my voice was strong when I thanked the panel. Afterward, I stood near the edge of the pier, the wind cold against my face, staring at the rippling water. I should have been elated, but another thought pressed in. I wanted them to see this. I wanted Dad, Linda, and Jessica to know that the girl they had cast aside was standing here, not just surviving, but winning. It was a small article in a student paper that changed everything. A reporter who had attended the fair wrote about CraftNest, mentioning briefly my background as a student who had been cut off from her family. The words were simple, but they spread faster than I expected. Soon, other blogs picked it up, framing my story as one of resilience. Disowned at Christmas, now building a business. One evening, as I sorted through emails at the kitchen table, Anna handed me her phone. "You need to see this," she said. It was a message request from someone I had not spoken to in years. Rachel Carter, my younger cousin. She wrote that she had read about me and wanted to meet. She said she remembered me as the cousin who once played with her in the backyard, the cousin who disappeared without explanation. My hands trembled as I read it. Part of me wanted to ignore it to keep the door sealed, but another part longed for some connection to blood that did not sting. Anna watched me carefully, her eyes questioning. I finally whispered that maybe not everyone in the Carter family had turned their back. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. Rachel looked nervous, her hands wrapped around her cup. She told me that Dad had banned my name in the house, that Linda referred to me only as a mistake. Jessica never mentioned me at all, but Rachel said she never forgot. She said she always wondered where I had gone, and reading the article had given her the courage to reach out. Her words cut me in ways I did not expect. I sat there with tears stinging my eyes, unsure if it was relief or sorrow. I wanted to believe her, to accept that maybe one thread of family remained untangled. But I had learned too much about betrayal to trust easily. Still, I thanked her. I told her that her message meant more than she could know. That night, I stood on the balcony of our apartment again, the city buzzing below. I thought of Dad's fury, Linda's cruel laugh, Jessica's sharp tongue. I thought of Rachel's hesitant smile, the possibility that not every Carter was poisoned by pride. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope that maybe blood did not always mean betrayal. As I watched the lights shimmer, I pinned another note to the wall inside. Someday when they knock, I will open the door and I will decide. The key turned in the lock of our first real office, and the sound of the door swinging open felt like a drumbeat in my chest. The space was nothing more than a single room on West Kinsey Street in Fulton Market, with scuffed floors, bare walls, and fluorescent lights that flickered when you hit the switch. But to me it was a palace. I ran my hand along the empty desks that we had bought secondhand from a liquidation sale, smelling the faint tang of old coffee and wood polish. Anna laughed behind me, her voice echoing off the walls. She said we finally had a place that was ours. I stood in that empty office with my arms folded across my chest, trying to let the moment sink in. All I could think of was Jessica's sneer years ago, the words that had branded themselves into me. Without us, you will starve. Yet here I was, unlocking the door to something I had built from the ground up. I whispered the words to myself not as a taunt, but as a reminder that I had kept myself alive. The first weeks in the office were chaotic. We worked long hours, our desks cluttered with paperwork, our whiteboard crowded with scribbled notes and arrows that never seemed to lead anywhere. Mark set up the server equipment in the corner, muttering to himself as he fixed glitches and tightened wires. Anna kept spreadsheets open on her laptop, the glow from the screen highlighting her tired face as she calculated every cent we had. I buried myself in meetings with local artists, reaching out to student organizations, anyone who might listen. The city outside seemed to hum with possibility. I would step out onto the street after a long day, smell the food trucks parked on the corner, hear the sound of trains in the distance, and feel like I was finally part of something larger than my pain. But every night, as I locked the office and walked home through the streets of Chicago, the past whispered at my heels. I would see posters of luxury brands, Jessica's face sometimes splashed across advertisements, and feel the sting return. Rachel met me for lunch one afternoon in a small cafe tucked between two brick buildings. She looked younger than I remembered, her nervous energy softened by an eagerness that felt genuine. She told me that my name was still banned in the Carter house, that Linda dismissed me whenever anyone asked, that Dad grew red in the face if I was mentioned. Yet she leaned forward across the table and said she was proud of me. Her words made my throat tighten. She reached for my hand and held it gently, as if she wanted to prove that blood could still mean connection. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that at least one person in that family saw me as more than a mistake. But trust was heavy for me now. I gave her a small smile, thanked her, and told her she was braver than she knew. As we parted, she hugged me tightly, and for a moment I felt the kind of warmth I had once longed for from my own sister. It was not long after that when the media found me again. A journalist from a local paper had been at the startup fair and now wanted to run a feature. When the article appeared, the headline blazed across the page, "From Christmas rejection to CEO, a daughter disowned, a company born." My stomach flipped as I read the words. They felt both like a wound and a victory. The article spread online, and suddenly people I had never met were writing to me. Some told me I was an inspiration. Others confessed their own stories of being cut off by family. My inbox filled with voices that echoed my own. The nickname came quietly at first in a comment section. Someone wrote, "She's the silent revenger." The name stuck, whispered in interviews, repeated by strangers who looked at me with admiration. I had not asked for it and I never said it myself, but secretly I felt the truth of it. I had not screamed or begged for revenge. I had simply kept going, and now the world was beginning to notice. But with attention came shadows. Dad's world was built on reputation, and the article cut into it like a knife. Carter and Hawthorne Asset Management prided itself on tradition and dignity, and now reporters were calling to ask why one of its founders had disowned his own daughter on Christmas. Linda told acquaintances it was a lie. Jessica posted photos of lavish vacations, ignoring every mention of my name in the comments. But the questions lingered, circling them like vultures. One evening, I received an email from a law firm representing the Carter family. The words were clipped and formal, demanding that I cease discussing my family in the press. I laughed out loud when I read it, the sound bitter and sharp in my throat. They had erased me from their lives, but now they were afraid of my voice. I closed my laptop and stared out the office window at the city skyline, the lights blinking like stars. They could not silence me anymore. The weight of it all pressed on me as the weeks went by. Success brought more work, more responsibility, more pressure. There were days I stumbled home too exhausted to speak, collapsing onto the couch with my shoes still on. Anna covered me with a blanket and whispered that we were making it. Mark brewed coffee at midnight and told me to keep pushing. Grace checked in with stern encouragement, warning me not to let bitterness consume me. Still, the bitterness lived inside me. I could not always tell where it ended and where I began. Some nights I would sit alone in the office after everyone left, staring at the sticky note I had pinned on the wall months before. Someday when they knock, I will open the door and I will decide. The words glared back at me, both promise and threat. I thought about them more than I wanted to admit. Dad in his tailored suits, Linda with her mocking smile, Jessica draped in jewels. I imagined them hearing whispers of me in their circles, seeing my name in print, realizing that the girl they had dismissed was no longer silent. Sometimes the thought gave me satisfaction. Other times it made my chest ache with longing for what had never been. One night after another grueling day, I walked home under the glow of street lamps. The air was cold, the city quieter than usual, and I let myself remember that Christmas night in full detail. Dad's booming voice, Linda's laugh, Jessica's venom. I whispered to the empty street that they had not broken me. I whispered that my revenge was my life, and it was louder than their cruelty ever could be. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, the sounds of the city fading behind me. Inside, Anna and Mark were sprawled across the couch. Papers and laptops scattered everywhere, half asleep, but still working. I stood in the doorway for a long time watching them, realizing that maybe family could be chosen after all. I went to my desk, pulled out a fresh sticky note, and wrote the words that had been circling in my mind. The sweetest revenge is survival. I stuck it beside the first one, stepped back, and let the two notes stare at me side by side. The next morning I woke with a sense of calm I had not felt in years. The past was still there, sharp and heavy, but it no longer felt like a chain. It felt like fuel. The flash from the cameras nearly blinded me as I stepped off the stage after speaking at the entrepreneurship forum. My heart was still racing, not from fear this time, but from adrenaline. The crowd had stood and clapped when I finished, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was more than just the girl who had been cast out on Christmas night. I was someone people listened to, someone people believed in, but the applause had barely faded before the whispers began. I could hear them in the corners of the lobby, reporters murmuring, competitors whispering questions spreading like wildfire. Was she only here because of the drama with her family? Did she build her business or just her story? That night I went back to the office, my heels clicking against the tile floor, the sound echoing in the empty hall. Anna was already there, her laptop open, her face pale. She looked up at me and slid her phone across the desk. Headlines filled the screen. David Miller, my old rival, had gone to the press with a claim that Craftnest's growth was fueled by pity, not merit. He had told them that I was trading on family betrayal, that my so-called success was just a publicity stunt. My stomach clenched so hard I had to grip the edge of the desk to stay upright. The days that followed were brutal. Investors pulled out of meetings. Emails went unanswered. I walked into rooms where people whispered behind their hands. The story had spread not just in student circles, but in the local press. Every time I opened my phone, I saw my own name attached to words like fraud or opportunist. It felt like being back at that Christmas dinner, every eye on me, every word cutting into me, except this time the whole city was watching. I tried to keep my voice steady when I told Anna we would push through it. I tried to believe it myself when I told Mark that the truth would win. But when the office was empty at night, when the lights outside flickered against the windows, I curled into my chair and felt the old shame rising again. I heard Dad's voice in the darkness, booming and merciless. "You are dead to me." I heard Jessica's sneer. "Without us, you will starve." The lies David spread began to sound like echoes of what I had always feared. It was Rachel who pulled me back. She showed up at the office one afternoon with 2 coffees in her hands and determination in her eyes. She sat across from me and told me the truth I needed to hear. She said the Carters were furious, that Dad had been slamming doors in the house, that Linda had snapped at dinner parties about me making them look bad, that Jessica rolled her eyes whenever my name came up. But Rachel leaned forward and told me I was stronger than all of them combined. She told me she believed in me, not just as a cousin, but as someone who had clawed her way up from nothing. I wanted to cry right there, but instead I squeezed her hand and whispered thank you. She reminded me that I was not alone, not completely. She reminded me that my story was mine to tell, not theirs to twist. So I decided to tell it. The next week, I called a press conference. My voice shook as I stepped up to the podium. Flashes lighting up the room, reporters shoving microphones forward. For a moment, I thought I would collapse, the weight of all those eyes too much to bear. But then I remembered the cold night I walked away from Applewood Court, the snow soaking into my shoes, my body trembling as I sat at the bus stop. I remembered the taste of saltine crackers stolen from the diner kitchen, the burn in my stomach as I studied on the bus ride home. I told them everything. I told them about the Christmas dinner when Dad slammed his fist and told me I was dead to him. I told them about Linda's laugh that sliced into me like broken glass. I told them about Jessica's venom when she hissed that I would starve without them. I told them about the bus ride into the city, about working nights at the diner, about scraping rent in a crumbling apartment. I told them about Craft Nest, about why I had built it, about the people it served. I told them that success was not handed to me. It was wrestled from the jaws of every doubt I had ever faced. The room was silent when I finished. Then slowly the clapping began. It started with 1 or 2 reporters, then spread until the whole room was applauding. Tears pricked my eyes, but I stood tall. For the first time I had spoken my truth aloud, not in whispers to myself, not in scribbled notes on my wall, but to the world. The backlash against David was swift. Investors called again asking to meet. The press printed stories that painted me not as a fraud, but as a fighter. People who had never heard of Craft Nest signed up, drawn by the authenticity of what we were building. I felt the ground steady under me again, but it was not the victory that mattered most. What mattered was that I had faced the echo of my father's voice and answered it with my own. That night, back in my apartment, I found a letter slipped under the door. The handwriting made my heart stop. It was Dad's. My hands shook as I tore it open. The words were half apology, half accusation. He wrote that he regretted how things had gone, but that I should stop dragging the family name through the mud. He said I was damaging their reputation, that my story had gone too far. He wrote that if I cared at all about blood, I would stay quiet. I sat on the floor, the paper trembling in my hands, tears streaming down my face. Not because I believed him, not because I wanted his approval, but because I realized in that moment that he would never change. He would never see me as anything other than a stain on his perfect life. Linda would never stop mocking me. Jessica would never stop sneering. They had not softened, not even after all these years. I folded the letter carefully, then tore it straight down the middle. I tore it again and again, until the pieces fell like confetti into the trash can. My chest rose and fell, the sound of my own breathing loud in the silence. It was not anger that filled me, but clarity. I did not need their love. I did not need their approval. I had built a life without them, and no letter could take that from me. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead to the cool glass. The city stretched out below, lights twinkling like promises. Behind me, the torn letter lay in the trash. In front of me, the future spread wide and open. I whispered to the night that I was no longer theirs to silence. The knock at the door came just as the clock struck 7 on Christmas Eve. I was standing in the kitchen of my Lincoln Park brownstone, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air, candles flickering softly on the table I had set for myself. The city outside was hushed by snowfall, the streets blanketed in white, and for the first time in years I had felt peace moving through me like a quiet song. Then the knock came again, louder this time, urgent, shaking me out of my moment. My stomach tightened. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the door, and pulled it open. There they were. Dad in his expensive coat that no longer fit him the way it once had, his shoulders slumped and his hair grayer, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. Linda behind him, her once flawless face stretched too tight, her lips painted but trembling. Jessica standing stiff beside them, her designer boots covered in slush, her chin tilted as if she still had a throne to sit on. For a moment, the years fell away and I was back at that dinner table, hearing Dad slam his fist and roar, hearing Linda laugh like she was watching a play, hearing Jessica spit that I would starve without them. Dad spoke first, his voice cracked and hoarse. "Emily, we need to talk." He tried to straighten his back, but the weight of his words made him hunch again. Linda forced a smile that flickered and died. Jessica said nothing, her eyes darting past me into the warm glow of the house as if she wanted to step in without being invited. I stood in the doorway, my hand on the frame, the winter air swirling around us. My chest tightened with the old anger and the old hurt, but beneath it was something new, a strength that had not been there the night I walked away into the snow with nothing. I told them to come, in my voice flat, and stepped aside. The living room was warm, the lights from the tree casting a soft glow on the walls. They looked out of place in my home like actors on the wrong stage. Dad sat down heavily on the couch, his hands clasped together, his knuckles pale. Linda perched on the edge of a chair, her nails tapping nervously against her wineglass when I set it down in front of her. Jessica crossed her arms, her posture sharp, her lips pressed tight. Dad cleared his throat and started talking. He spoke of bad investments, of business partners who had betrayed him, of losses that had drained the company dry. He spoke of debts mounting, of houses being sold, of the Carter name slipping from the glossy pages of magazines into whispers of scandal. Linda cut in with sharp words, blaming others, her voice high and brittle. Jessica finally broke her silence, muttering about paparazzi and ruined contracts, her bitterness seeping into every syllable. The truth unfolded in pieces. They were broke. The empire Dad had built, the empire they had chosen over me, had crumbled. They were standing in my house because they had nowhere else to go. Robert leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. "We are family, Emily. Family helps each other." His words nearly made me laugh. The memory of that night burned in my chest, his voice declaring I was dead to him, Linda's cruel laughter, Jessica's hiss that I would starve without them. And now here they were, begging at my door. I asked him if he remembered that night. I asked him if he remembered what he had said to me, how he had cast me out, how he had watched me walk into the cold without a backward glance. His jaw tightened, his face red. He said things had been complicated. He said emotions had run high. He said I should not live in the past. Linda interrupted, her voice sharp. "We gave you everything," she said, her hand waving in the air as if to dismiss my pain. "And look at you now, successful because of what we taught you. Shouldn't you be grateful?" My chest burned with fury, but I forced myself to stay calm. I asked her what exactly she thought they had taught me. To survive hunger, to live with shame, to fight alone. Jessica finally spoke, her eyes narrowing. "Without us, you would have been nothing. You would have been a nobody. You think your little company makes you more than us." The venom in her voice was the same as that night. It had not changed. She had not changed. I stood then, my hands trembling, but my voice steady. I walked to the door and pulled it open wide, the cold air rushing in. They turned to look at me confused. I told them I had survived 21 years without them, that I had built everything they saw without a dime of their money, without an ounce of their support. I told them that when they cut me off, I thought I would starve, but instead I had learned how to live. And then I said the words I had waited a lifetime to speak. "You are no longer family." The silence that followed was heavy. Linda's face twisted with rage, and she spat that they had never loved me anyway, that they only came because they needed help. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but even then she did not apologize. She only muttered that I owed them, that I would never have made it without their blood. Dad's shoulders sagged, his eyes flickering with something like regret, but the words caught in his throat. He could not say he was sorry. Not really. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door. The cold wind howled through the room, rattling the ornaments on the tree. They gathered their coats and their pride, and one by one they walked out. Linda muttering curses under her breath, Jessica's tears streaking her perfect makeup, Dad silent, his head bowed. I watched them step into the snow, their figures fading into the night. When I closed the door, my back pressed against the wood. My chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot against my skin. But they were not the tears of the abandoned girl from years ago. They were the tears of a woman who had finally taken back her power. The house was silent again, the candles flickering gently, the warmth wrapping around me. I walked back to the table, sat down, and stared at the plate of roasted chicken. I had no appetite, but I let the silence fill me. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the footprints they had left behind. I whispered into the stillness, "Revenge is not money, it is freedom." The snow was still falling the next morning when sunlight streamed weakly through the windows, leaving a soft glow on the hardwood floors of my brownstone. I stood barefoot by the window, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and stared out at this quiet street. Their footprints were gone now, covered by fresh snow. It felt symbolic, as if the night before had been erased from the world outside, though inside me it lived like fire. I thought about the look on Dad's face when I told him he was no longer family, about Linda's sneer, about Jessica's bitter tears. I had waited 21 years to say those words, and now that they were out, my chest felt hollow and full all at once. The day passed, slowly, filled with phone calls from reporters wanting quotes, emails from strangers pouring in with support, messages from other disowned daughters and sons who said my story had given them courage. I sat at my desk answering as many as I could, my fingers trembling not with fear anymore but with the enormity of what I had done. I was no longer just Emily who had been abandoned. I was Emily who had survived, who had built something, who had faced her ghosts and refused them entry. That evening, Anna and Mark came over. Anna brought champagne, Mark brought cake, and they insisted we celebrate. The three of us sat around the table, the room glowing with laughter, the sound of glasses clinking echoing against the walls. I looked at their faces and realized that family could be chosen, that love could be built where blood had failed. When Anna hugged me goodbye that night, she whispered that she was proud of me, and I knew she meant it more than any relative ever had. In the days that followed, Craftnest flourished. Investors who had once hesitated now called me, eager to be part of what I had created. Orders surged on the platform. Artists from across the country joined, grateful for a space that honored their work. I threw myself into it, building late into the night, but this time it did not feel like running from hunger. It felt like running toward a future I had earned. One afternoon, Rachel appeared at the office. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around before they settled on me. She told me she had argued with Dad after that night, that she had stood up at the dinner table and told him he had no right to knock on my door after disowning me. She said Linda had snapped at her, Jessica had rolled her eyes, but Rachel had not backed down. She said she wanted to be in my life, not theirs. My chest tightened, and for a long moment I could not speak. Finally, I opened my arms and she fell into them. It was the first time in decades that I felt something close to forgiveness, not for the ones who had betrayed me, but for the child who had once loved them anyway. Weeks passed and the Carter scandal grew. Dad's company dissolved. Linda disappeared from the social circuit. Jessica's contracts with fashion houses dried up. I read about them in the papers, sometimes brief mentions buried deep, and each time I felt nothing but a strange stillness. I no longer needed their downfall to define me. Their absence was its own victory. On the anniversary of the night I was cast out, I stood once again by my window. The snow fell in heavy flakes, the city muffled in white. I remembered my father's voice, Linda's laughter, Jessica's sneer. I remembered my frozen walk to the bus stop, the hunger, the shame, the endless nights of work and study. And then I looked around at the warmth of my home, at the success of my company, at the family I had chosen. My revenge had never been about money or even about making them beg. It had been about proving to myself that I could live. I whispered into the quiet room, "You are no longer family." And this time the words felt like freedom, not fury. To everyone listening to my story now, I want you to think about the people in your own life who told you that you could not make it, who tried to break you, who shut doors in your face. Remember that their words do not define you. You do. My journey was long and painful, but I would not trade it, because it made me who I am. If you have ever been betrayed by those closest to you, know this. You can rise. You can create your own path. You can survive, and survival is the sweetest revenge. If my story touched you, I would love to hear yours. Share it in the comments, because stories like ours deserve to be told. And if you want to walk with me through more stories of betrayal, justice, and redemption, make sure you subscribe and join me here. We are not alone in this. We are building something stronger than blood.